There is a solution for that is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-based development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit varcsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of There's a Solution for That. We've got an amazing guest on today, Ariel Lapiano, who's going to be talking to us about financial storytelling, making complex things less complex. So, Ariel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brad.
Awesome. Just maybe to just tell the audience a little bit about you, kind of how you got into this whole business of making things less complicated.
Well, let me start with a quick story, if you don't mind. I often call myself a complexity translator. And I call myself that because years ago I was an actual translator. So I was working in a freezing, fluorescent lit war room in a law firm working on the fen-phen diet litigation. And my job was to translate French medical and legal documents into English. So pretty complex stuff.
It sounds fascinating, by the way.
Oh, I made it sound way too fascinating. Then I should add to you, in a war room, 10 hours a day across from the men's bathroom. So I got very familiar with diet drug litigation and how to say a lot of words I didn't learn how to say in French in college or growing up. And I also got really familiar with everybody's bathroom schedule. That make it sound a little less interesting to you now, hopefully.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing for a couple of years. And I went on to do some other things. And a couple of years ago, I was thinking back about my career and maybe thinking about having one of these conversations. And I wanted to come up with a more interesting way of explaining what I do. And I realized, oh, wait, I'm still a translator. And I'm just translating in a different way. So I went on to be a reporter, financial reporter for a while. And then I went from being a reporter to doing what many people refer to as going to the dark side, going to PR and working with financial consultants, Bitcoin bros, digital asset people, and lawyers. So I was always in these very complex fields, working with people in complex industries. And what I was actually always doing throughout everything was taking complex matters and helping translate them in a way that made them easy and accessible for other people to understand. So that's why I like to more interestingly, I hope, say that I'm a complexity translator.
Well, I think that's awesome, and I mean your story and your background is quite fascinating, believe it or not. I mean, I think it's fascinating. Somebody who's not into the drug stuff that you're talking about, maybe
All
maybe not,
right.
but I think it's fascinating, and it's always interesting to talk to people and how they kind of got to where they are in their career. So thanks so much for kind of sharing that background. And I'm glad that you survived that, and now you're in a place where you can take that learning and experience and help businesses, financial professionals take that complex stuff and make it less complicated. And so here's my follow-up question to that is, why is this especially helpful or necessary in terms of what you do to financial professionals? Because I mean, obviously, what you do could apply to a lot of different industries, but why so much, or why so much more in financial circles?
Love the question and love that you're finding my background interesting. I almost feel like I'm not doing a good job of making it sound complex or uninteresting enough then. But I would say that finance is what I very lovingly, very affectionately call a nerd-rich environment. All right. And I love my nerds. I am a nerd. So it's really full of like very brilliant people, but speaking in very technical terms, right? And it's also a place where people are very guilty of something called the curse of knowledge. These are really smart people, most of them, many of them. And what happens is the smarter we get, the more disconnected we get from understanding that other people may not understand us. So you take the fact that it's a complex industry, a lot of complex jargon, and nerds, who I love, and you put those all together. It's like finance is a dream for me to work in because it's an area where people really need help translating what they're saying for other people. That's the other part of finance, right? There's an institutional side to it, of course, as we all know, but many finance professionals or companies are in the business of selling their complexity to the rest of us who don't understand what the heck they're talking about, right? And so that's where I come in, really trying to help explain the rest of us. And so I think it's like an area where, yeah, really need a lot of complexity translation.
Well, I appreciate it. I've seen that myself. I mean, obviously in the accounting industry, finance industry, there's definitely a lot of buzzwords. There's a lot of lingo.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen it, of course, like you in the legal profession. I mean, there's just so many things like, what do these things mean in these contracts? Tort and non-tort and blah blah blah. When I read client
Blah,
agreements
blah,
or
blah. A lot of blah, blah,
a
blah.
lot of blah blah blahs. Yeah. When I read agreements, that either I'm signing or we're sending out, those are pretty common. And I guess the other area that this translates to as well is the IT space, right? There's um, so many acronyms that are thrown around. So how much of what you do is just raising awareness that there is a gap?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, um, I haven't pondered that question before, but I guess that's part of what, like, that's sort of my starting point, right? Is helping be really comfortable saying to someone, I don't get that, or I don't think your audience will get that. So I think, going back, like, whenever we're thinking about communicating, it's so important to think about like who you're communicating for,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so the more that you can like under explain, get people to understand and get more clear on who they're communicating to, which by the way is another thing that people aren't clear on, right? But the more that they understand that, then that's when you can help highlight, yes, there is this gap because you're talking about like name the acronym, and these people do not understand that like at all. And I think there's certain industries. I could go to digital assets, like digital assets. The digital asset guys and gals, they know that what they're talking about is hard to understand. It's almost in a way like easier for me to work with people in digital assets because they get how complex it is. I think it's like harder, like take a wealth manager who is like, well, like, don't people just know this? I've been doing this for 30 years. Like, well, duh. It's like, no, 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 no. You're going to be talking to somebody who's just never managed their money before or had someone manage their money. These are really really uncomfortable, unknown principles. And one of my favorite things to do is to say, can you dumb that down? And then say dumber. Like you have to be really, really, I have a very thick skin that has gotten very comfortable feeling dumb.
Well, and it helps to be humble too, right? To be able to say, I don't understand. I'm not getting this. Please, to say it differently.
Say
Uh,
it differently.
I remember, I remember back in the day, a couple of careers ago, a couple of lives ago, I remember interacting with like one of my first CFO type people, and they were talking about accruals and reversals, and they were talking about de minimis. I mean, that was the first time I had ever heard somebody say, "Oh, that's de minimis," and I was like, "Huh?"
Yeah. I mean, anytime somebody is like using a word to sound smarter, like, because let's be real, that's what people do. And that's the other thing that I like to share to people. Like when you're doing that, you're actually usually you're disconnect. Like you are creating less connection rather than more. You're doing the opposite of what we're meant to do when we're communicating, which is ultimately to connect.
Exactly, exactly. Well, so I think like when I think about this topic, and you talked about kind of like knowing your audience, and if you were going to a medical conference and you were delivering a message to medical professionals, you could probably use those acronyms and those phrases and all those technical jargons all day long, and probably is the key, be pretty okay. But I guarantee you, there's probably somebody in the audience that is never going to speak up. They're never going to say, I don't understand in front of a room of other professionals where they're expected to understand, right? Because there's that whole social, like, I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my peers type of thing. And so being mindful of the fact that there may be somebody in the room that isn't getting it, that's never going to raise their hand. How do you maybe get somebody in that scenario to again really to dumb it down voluntarily without somebody even raising their hand?
I mean, I always try to encourage people to communicate to, let's go to math, like the lowest common denominator, right? Like, so you want to sort of assume, I think there's two things you want to assume, and apologies, because my mom taught me you should never assume because you know what happens when you assume,
I do.
right? Right. But you want to assume two things. Number one, you want to assume that nobody cares. And I know that's so strange to say, but it helps you ensure that your communication is really going to be powerful. So assume that they don't care, and assume that they don't understand is the second thing.
Yeah.
I even if you think about writing a really good research paper, which we've probably all had the experience of doing, you know how you make a research paper stronger? You make it stronger by stating your assumptions, right? Like, so we actually intentionally do what people would say is dumbing it down when we write academic research, but we don't do that in our communications. And
Mhm.
so I think it like I like to go back to like it sort of starts with like good communications hygiene, so to speak. And that means thinking about your audience and to your point, just also assuming that your audience knowledge is actually lower than you might think it is. You have
Right.
to think less, and I don't mean this in a mean way. I'm saying it to be cute. You have to think less of your audience.
Right. So that you're speaking at an appropriate level, basically.
So you speak at an appropriate level, you
Yeah.
know? Like, if you think about, I feel like most people would have seen a TED Talk.
Yes.
Okay, TED Talks are like, have you ever seen a TED Talk? I don't know how many people have seen a TED Talk and thought that guy, that gal doesn't know what they're talking about. Like these people, 99% of the time they are polished because the TED people are doing their research, right?
Right.
Are they using jargon? Are they, right? No, they are making their communications crystal clear. And that's what it's about. It's just like it's about giving people clarity so you can ensure that they connect. So it feels like to a lot of professionals that it's beneath them or beneath the audience. But I'm telling you, most audiences will appreciate that's the thing to say to people is people will appreciate it. Nobody wants to read through a really long paragraph. Nobody wants to listen to a really long description. Keep it short and sweet, stupid, right?
Yeah.
Kiss.
Yeah. Well, I like what you're saying there because when I have watched, TED Talks, usually the speakers, especially the ones that are super great, they are trying to make it real, right? It's like, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you, something that you can relate to, so you can understand this maybe very complicated topic. I remember kind of an aside here. I remember watching one topic in particular about how you actually how weight is actually lost. And in his translation at the end of this whole thing was it's literally about breathing. The more you breathe, the more weight you lose. And he was like trying to do the whole chemical
Breathing.
the chemical transfer of, ions or whatever you call it when you exercise, and it's just about breathing more. So my encouragement to everybody who wants to lose weight, just go breathe more, just do a lot more breathing.
Okay, good to know.
Yep.
Good to know. I
But
didn't think I was going to get these tidbits today, so thank
but that
you.
was but that was just an example, right? And so, but your point is, make it real, make it simple so that people can understand. So let's shift gears here just a little bit, and let's talk to our audience. Let's talk to the people who maybe in a financial position, trying to tell a financial story to an owner, to a board of directors, to a group of investors. What are some of the tips and techniques that you try to pass on for somebody in that role, to help them do this type of work better?
Well, first of all, I want to double down on your story, right? About the importance of a story, right? That stories really are one of the most effective ways to communicate, and one of the most memorable ways to communicate, right? And I would argue that it doesn't really make sense for us to communicate if what we're saying is going to be so easily forgot. Like, I don't think we pay enough attention to the importance of messages being memorable in our world. So I want our audience, and somebody who's sitting there thinking about, like, how can I do this better? I want them to understand how important stories are to be memorable. And stories are what turns information into influence,
Hmm.
into action. And it's not just me saying this. Like, there's a Stanford professor, Jennifer Acker, and she has found that stories compared to facts are 22 times more memorable. Like 22 more times. Like, that's insane. And it's not just her at Stanford, like Harvard's done their research too. And they have found that stories compared to data lead to better long-term recall and more persuasive impact than numbers. So this is really important for your audience of financial professionals, like, to think about, right? And the reason is because stories activate like more parts of the brain. So, like, if I were at a TED Talk right now talking about this, I would have like a pretty slide up right now, right? To
Right.
help people remember this, right? So if there's just a fact you're getting, it just kind of like lights up your analytical part of the brain. But when you get a story, all of a sudden it lights up your emotional and your connection regions of the brain more. So it literally gets your brain working more. So if anyone were to take like one takeaway from today, I would encourage people to think of more stories to tell.
I think that's great. And kind of related to that, right? Statistics. I think financial professionals, they tend to use more, ratios and percentages and things like that, which is that analytical data side. I don't know if you're aware of this, but 92% of all statistics are made up,
I
including that one.
That's a good one. That's a good
That's a
one, Brad. I like it.
that's a little ratio joke for you.
I
Um,
love I love I mean, like I said, love my nerds, so I love a ratio joke.
So again, let's get practical here. So, like, if a financial professional, again, they may be talking about a P&L, they may be talking about a budget. How does somebody take a P&L or a budget and turn that into a story? It seems like that might be not an obvious thing.
It's not obvious, and I love a challenge, right? So, I mean, how do you take a PLL and turn it into a story? I'd say, what is the story of your profit, or what is the story of your loss? There's a reason that your company is doing well or is not doing well, And so it's always like thinking of a story always has like tension in it, right? A challenge. And I was actually, in preparation for our time together, I thought it'd be fun to like look back to see how the heck did I make things interesting when I was a reporter writing about financial derivatives. And I looked back at some of the stories that I could find online that still haven't expired after 20 years, right? And the way I did it was always tension. It's like, it's always trying to figure out like where the challenge was, and on the flip side, sometimes the opportunity. So with PNL, try to figure out the tension. The other thing is zero in on individuals. So is there a specific client you can talk about? So this is another interesting thing about how our brains work. We don't like to take in a lot of information about a lot of people, but if you narrow it down to one individual, we're much more likely to take action and respond to that. Like, I don't know if your audience will be, I'm hoping that people will be old enough to remember those like feed the children commercials, right? Like sponsor a child, right? That's what we were encouraged to, sponsor one child. And those were more powerful, very iconic 80s commercials because they got like us to, it did a couple of things. It was a story, it pulled on our emotions, and it focused more. So I actually think there are a lot of ways to get creative about finding stories.
Well, like as I think of it, kind of like in response, when I've had talks with clients, and as ironic as this might sound, I've had clients say, "Hey, I think I've made too much money." Right. And so that's kind of a weird thing, right? You're like, well, that sounds like a good problem to me. But the tension, okay, the tension that is there, it's not about making money, as strange as that sounds. It's about how that impacts taxes. Okay. If I make more money, I might have to pay more taxes. If I make less money, I'll pay less taxes. But there's a tension there, right? I need to make more money. I want to make more money. So how does that sort of balance between, making business profit and then the tax impact? So those, as I reflect on what you're saying, I think that might be a good example of where somebody could identify some tensions. Like, hey, even though this is going to cost us a little bit more in taxes, it's a good thing because we're making more money. My dad always said I would love to pay more taxes, and I'm like, what? He's like, I'd love to pay more taxes because that means I've made a lot more money. Okay.
And you, by the way, like you've hit on another great storytelling technique, which is making something unexpected, right? So I'd love to pay more taxes. Those are not words that I've ever heard together in a sentence. And they're really interesting, and I will probably remember them, right? So if you can find like a way of saying something unexpected or doing something unexpected, it gets your audience like engaged in a different way. So tension, surprise, stories, keeping it simple. These are all principles that really help make our messages stick.
Perfect. Well, let me ask you a follow-up question related to this. So when you think of a financial professional, and again, that could be somebody within a business that
Mhm.
just has that role. Maybe they're an internal accountant, senior controller, CFO, or maybe they're like a fractional CFO doing work for lots of different clients. Um, you've mentioned in the past, I've seen you talk, and you've mentioned something about like a personal brand. Like, as a professional, how they communicate can affect their brand. And so tell me a little bit more about what you've seen in terms of a positive result of somebody taking your advice and running with it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So I am really crazy passionate about branding, and I'm so passionate about branding because it's like so much branding gets like thrown around a lot. You might think it's like about logos or like a color palette. And sure, like those are things that are part of branding, but really at its essence, what branding is about is on a company level, I say that it's about like thinking about like what your promise is to your customers. And on an individual level, I think of it more like what are your gifts and how are you packaging them and how are you giving them away? Like so, the image of a gift is a really good way of thinking about branding. And I think of branding for individuals as like the foundation for anything else you're doing to raise your visibility. So, you're thinking about getting a new job, but you haven't like figured out your branding. You don't know like what your unique gifts are. Like you don't know actually, you don't know that you're a complexity translator rather than just a communications consultant, if you see what I'm saying, right?
Mhm.
I could have come today and told you I'm a communications consultant and started that way. Not as interesting, not as
Right.
memorable. And so I say to everybody, yeah, think about your personal branding means just getting really clear on your strengths, your values, and how you package that together and like how they show up in the world. And what I share with people is you have a brand whether you like it or not, right? It's sort of like a magnet. It has a an opportunity to repel people, like that's just a reality, and it has a chance to attract people. And the more you're conscious and work to curate it, the more you can turn it into like the type of magnet or an algorithm for you. Like that's my favorite analogy for curating your personal brand is you can turn it into your own personal like algorithm. Um, like that's why I feel like I'm here with you today because like I in a way have hopefully done a little bit of that with my own brand, right? The more
Yeah.
I double down onto saying I'm a complexity translator, the more likely that people from complex industries, the nerds who I love, are reaching out to me saying, "Hey, can you help me?" So I would encourage the financial professionals out there to get a little bit more self-aware, essentially. And there are, of course, tons of people like me that you can work with to help like think about this some more, and then think about how you package it. And that's like so fundamental to me because the more you work on this, like as I said, it's the foundation for everything else. And once you've put the energy into it, it makes everything else in the sort of visibility stack a lot easier because you've done it's like a strategy map for you and you have your strategy map. So you asked me as well, like, do I have an example? I'm working with a financial professional who is with a top organization and at the C level, so really impressive guy. And he wasn't aware of his brand. Like he was, what he would have done before is he was talking about his title when he went to connect with people. Now he talks more about the value he brings. And he's looking to switch jobs. And now he's starting to get more opportunities and the right opportunities because he has like a different sort of vocabulary, different like tool. It's like a tool set. So he now has like a different tool set to help himself. And is also helping him because 9 times out of 10, especially at an executive level, the other people you're talking to are not financial professionals
Right.
level. Like you need to convince a CEO or, the COO who isn't from a finance background that you would be a great CFO. So I think it's a really powerful tool set and skill set to have, especially in this day of LinkedIn, where personal branding can really be helpful.
For sure, for sure. And I mean, I like everything you're saying, and I'm when I think of that, you know, like all the everything I know about like being a leader, running leading a team, all that stuff, and also doing the hiring and everything else within multiple organizations. When you get to a certain level within an organization, it has less and less about your technical competence, right? It's like it's can you communicate? Can you lead people? And a large a large factor in that is how well you communicate and do you have that emotional quotient, right? That EQ to be able to relate with people. And so what kind of came to me as you were talking about that is when you can kind of put on that hat of this is not about me and all the jargon and all the technical and all the things that people might not understand without me dumbing it down. I'm flipping it to say, how do these people how are these people going to hear me? How are these people going to understand me? Are they going to get it? And that's
Yep.
partly that's EQ. It's like how are these people going to react to me and my message? And so a large part of being successful in any career, especially at the higher levels, is that EQ. So it's kind of like you're not saying that, but it sounds like it's part of the thing, whether you're looking for a job or if you're just
Yeah.
simply trying to be more effective in your role. This all kind of comes together.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before, but now, the next podcast I do, for sure, I'm going to be talking about emotional intelligence. I hadn't thought of it, but I think that that's definitely right. I think like even going back to the idea of knowing your audience, that takes a certain type of emotional intelligence to like think that way, and then
Hmm.
of course to then deliver appropriately to your audience takes another level of EQ. And then finally, to deliver a story is like a different level. So, yeah, all right, forget it. I'm not going to talk about brand anymore. No, it's all emotional intelligence. But, yeah, I guess I'm an emotional intelligence expert in some weird ways as well. But of course, because communication is so closely tied to EQ. It's like they are definitely sisters or brothers.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I am glad to help. No,
Thank
you're help. I'm just processing what you're saying, so I'm actually learning a lot as we
you.
go. And also for anybody that thinks that they know all this stuff, what I love about the kind of conversation that you and I are having is it's an incredibly good reminder, right? Even if I learned this 10, 20 years ago or whatever, right now I've got a meeting next week. What am I doing right now for that meeting that I'm going to do next week to make what I think I'm going to present easier to understand, easier to comprehend. So I think a lot of the advice that you're sharing is great. I'm going to go back to something, by the way, you mentioned at the beginning, which I don't know, I just think is curious and interesting. It's like I think you said something about like people aren't going to remember something
Yeah.
about that, right? What I think is funny when I go to conferences and I hear speakers, regardless of like the technical level or anything else, it's like, yeah, I remember very little of what they said, but if there is that story, and this is to your point, I think if they told a story during their presentation, it's usually the story that I remember, and all those other words that they said throughout the entire presentation, I don't remember.
I mean, like I said, like go back to TED Talks. Like TED Talks are such an interesting sort of like ground for like communications. Um, if you go back to TED Talks, like most of the best, like the top ones are rich in stories, rich in them, you know. So I'm thinking of my grandfather who I sat around listening to endless stories, and I did, so I grew up not thinking stories were so great. I thought that they were kind of boring because I still remember being the last one in the room listening to my grandfather tell stories. But I've learned since from other relations too that stories are really, really powerful. And I just go back to, yeah, like it's what's the point of communicating if nobody's going to remember you? And if we know that like science literally tells us that stories are like an effective vehicle, we should like use them.
Well, so beyond stories, are there any other like, do this, don't do this type of tips that you would have to share?
Oh, I love like do this, don't do this. Yeah, so this is not going to surprise you. The first one is don't be complex. Don't lead with complexity, lead with simplicity. Like always choose the easier way to say something. Uh, don't drown your audience in data. Again, bring it to life with an analogy. Don't use jargon, use English. Keep it simple, keep it clear, and think about communicating to a smart 14-year-old. Now, somebody will always invariably tell me that their 14-year-old is brilliant. Okay, so an average 14-year-old, okay?
Right.
And what we've also talked about before, which is like don't start with yourself, start with your audience. Like that is so difficult to do. Um, Related to that, the common theme through everything that we've really been talking about is in some way is to find a way to cultivate curiosity, right? Like, so be curious about your audience, be curious about what you're talking about. Like, there's something about curiosity that is like really powerful when it comes to communications. And by the way, emotional intelligence. And of course, whenever you have a choice, this isn't a don't do, but just always, again, try to figure out where you can tell stories. Like, I wish my memory were better so that I could tell more stories.
Well, you're doing great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, so as we wrap up, this podcast, as we wrap up this show, what I'm curious about is, if someone wanted to learn more, if someone wanted to work with you specifically to help them be a better storyteller, help them be better at making those complex topics less complicated, more simple, more effective, how do they get a hold of you? And like, where do they go? What do you recommend they do?
I am pretty easy to find because there's only one Ariel Lapiano, so you can easily find me. I'd love for people to find me on LinkedIn. I basically live on LinkedIn. It's not healthy. I really probably should look into that, but it is where I'm living. So you can find me there. Like I said, there's just one Ariel Lapiano, and you can learn a little bit more about me. And I'm pretty good about like staying on top of my connections and DMs there. So would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, again, Ariel, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for a really interesting conversation. And I'm so glad I was able to stay curious because I learned a couple of things too. Thank you for that.
Same. I always learn something on every show. So thank you again. And for those of you that are here listening, watching, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned a lot about this topic and really got some value out of it. And thanks for taking the time to listen and watch. And we will see you again next time. There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. Or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.